The god smelled like a fishery that had given up on life. Mara Voss had been told this before her first contract, 22 years ago, by the old woman who trained her, a leathery, one-eyed harvester named Cord, who smoked constantly and spoke in the clipped, economical sentences of someone who had decided long ago that most words weren't worth the air. "They smell," Cord had said, "and not like you'd expect. Not sacred, not ancient. They smell like something that forgot to finish dying." At the time, Mara had assumed this was metaphor. Standing now at the bow of Dresh's barge, watching the drowned one's cheekbone emerge from the black water of the weeping coast like the prow of a sunken continent, she could confirm, not metaphor. The smell was a physical thing, salt and decay and something underneath both, something organic and ancient and faintly sweet in the way that only very wrong things ever smelled sweet. It rolled off the god in slow waves. Gulls didn't fly here. Nothing flew here. The air itself seemed to have reconsidered its options and left. "Lovely morning," said Dresh from behind her. Real restorative. Great for the constitution." Dresh. "Yeah. Stop talking." He stopped talking. He was good at that, knowing precisely when the quota was full. It was why she'd hired him 8 years ago, and why she'd kept him, which wasn't something she did with most people. Most people she encountered in this line of work ended up in one of 3 categories: dead, in prison for something she'd tangentially caused, or simply gone in the quiet way that people went when they decided that working adjacent to Mara Voss was a lifestyle choice they wanted to revisit. Dresh had simply remained. It was his most underrated quality. She studied the approach. The drowned one had fallen face first into the sea 211 years ago, during what historians called the absence, and what everyone else called the worst week in recorded history. 7 days during which every god in existence had simply stopped. No warning, no final proclamation, no meaningful symbolism. They had been present on a Monday and absent by the following Sunday, their bodies distributed across the planet's geography with the graceless randomness of things that had simply fallen where they stood. The drowned one had been over the ocean when it happened. The impact had generated a wave that reshaped 3 coastlines. The face had settled at an angle, chin and left cheek submerged, right cheek and brow exposed, one eye socket breaching the surface like a cave entrance at low tide. From the water, it looked like a mountain range that had the misfortune of resembling a person. Mara's contract was straightforward. Tear duct tissue, right side, minimum 40 kilos crystallized grade A extract. A pharmaceutical firm, one of the Render Corp's 17 subsidiary labels, was synthesizing an ocular treatment for divine contact exposure. The irony of this did not escape her. She'd been experiencing divine contact exposure since she was 12 years old, and the closest she'd come to treatment was the occasional glass of something strong enough to make the voice in her head go briefly quiet. She flexed her right hand. The prosthetic responded, the divine femur and iron bracing that replaced everything below her elbow, moving with the slightly too smooth articulation of a mechanism that wasn't quite mechanical. The calcification line had moved again overnight. She hadn't measured it, but she could feel the difference the way you feel a tooth that started to ache before it's actually aching. A new awareness, a new weight, the body sending early correspondence about a problem it intended to escalate. Mid-forearm now. 2 weeks ago, it had been the wrist. She pulled her sleeve down and thought about something else. The dock was a ramshackle structure hammered directly into divine flesh, a collection of mismatched planks and salvaged iron bolts sunk into what would have been the drowned one's lower jaw, just above the waterline. It wasn't Rendered Corp's standard issue. Too crude, too organic, built by someone who'd worked alone and fast and hadn't expected it to last. But it had lasted, because divine tissue didn't rot the same way ordinary matter did, and bolts sunk into it stayed sunk. Other remnants of previous expeditions dotted the surface as Mara climbed. Rope ends, anchor points, a shattered crate with the Rendered Corp logo still visible on one face, a length of chain that terminated in nothing in particular. The god's cheek was not a comfortable place to move. The pores were manhole wide, the skin surface rough and fissured, the terrain unpredictable in the way that all terrain was unpredictable when the thing you were walking on had never been intended as terrain. She reached the top of the approach ridge and stopped. Tracks. Not human footprints. She'd have expected those, would have been annoyed but unsurprised. These were wide and splayed, four-pointed like an outstretched hand pressed flat against the surface, roughly 60 centimeters across. Multiple sets, crisscrossing. Some older, some fresh enough that the displaced residue of divine skin oil still glistened at the edges. Mara crouched, studied them for a moment. "Dresh," she said into the radio. "Yeah, we got indigenous life activity up here. Recent." A pause. The sound of Dresh doing something nautical in the background. "What kind of indigenous life?" "Big. Four-limbed, but not the right four limbs. I don't know yet." She straightened, following the tracks with her eyes toward the upper cheekbone. They led toward the eye socket, as she'd suspected and hadn't wanted to confirm. Could be divine-adjacent fauna, could be occult's pets, could be something new. "I love all three of those options," said Dresh. "They're all tremendous. Send up the harpoon rig." "You just told me about tracks and your first instinct is to escalate the armament." "Send up the harpoon rig, Dresh." He sent up the harpoon rig. She found the body shortly after, behind a fold of skin where a wrinkle in the divine cheek had created a shallow depression. Enough shelter to die in, not enough to have survived in. Rendered corp contractor, based on the armor. Corporate-grade alloy with the subsidiary logo embossed on the chest plate, now bent inward from some force applied from the inside. The body had been opened, not attacked, opened. The sternum folded outward in a shape that made her think, unwillingly, of flower petals. The wound edges were clean in a way that impact wounds were not. This had been precise. Whatever had used this man's chest as an exit point had known what it was doing, or at least had done it enough times to develop competence. She stood over the body for a moment, cataloged what she saw. Professional reflex. "Rendered corp body up here," she reported. "Chest wound, outward, atypical mechanism, probably 2-3 days old." "Do I want to know what kind of chest wound?" "You don't." "Okay." She looked up. The eye socket was visible from here. The right one, their destination. A dark gap in the god's brow large enough to fly a medium-sized airship through. The fallen lid had created a natural lip at the bottom, a rough threshold. From this distance, the interior was dark and gave nothing away. She thought about the chest wound, about the direction of the injury, about something that required a human torso as a door. She thought about whether the contractually specified 40 kilos of tear duct crystal was worth this particular wrinkle. She hefted the harpoon rig onto her shoulder and started walking toward the socket. It was worth it. She had a mortgage. Here's the thing about divine eye sockets that the textbooks covered adequately, but that experience covered better. They were not empty. This was known broadly. In the 2 centuries since the absence, explorers and harvesters and the various categories of people who occupied the space between those two professions had documented the tendency of divine anatomy to become habitat. Gods were large enough to contain ecosystems. Their decay produced environments. Things grew in them, nested in them, evolved specific adaptations to the strange chemistry of divine tissue. The field literature on divine adjacent fauna filled several academic libraries and was generally considered some of the more disturbing reading available to a society that had been structurally desensitized to the disturbing. None of it had prepared Mara for the drowned one's eye. She stood at the threshold, the fallen lid edge, rough stone-like skin beneath her boots, and looked in and revised several assumptions she hadn't realized she'd been making. The socket was vast, 300 meters across at least, the orbital bone curving overhead like the vault of an ancient hall. The eyeball itself was long dissolved, which she'd expected, but what it had left behind was not the hollow cave the surveyor reports had described. The space was transformed. tear crystal coated every surface. The amber extract she'd come for, yes, but not in the rough mineral deposits she'd anticipated. It was layered, architectural, built up in sheets and flows and formations that caught what dim light filtered through the water outside and broke it into fractured gold across every surface. It was, and she resented thinking this, beautiful. The beauty was secondary to the other thing. From the upper orbital bone, hanging in clusters like obscene fruit, pale translucent sacs roughly the size of a traveling trunk, each one pulsing with a slow, rhythmic internal motion. Dozens of them, each pulse casting a faint bioluminescent shimmer through the amber gold interior. Not geological formations, not decay byproduct, eggs. And on every surface, the walls, the floor, the lower curve of the orbital bone, the creatures that had made the tracks outside. Quadrupedal, translucent skinned, so the dark fluid moving through their internal systems was visible, a shifting dark map beneath pale membrane. 4 eyes each, arranged in a wide diamond pattern on a skull that was simultaneously alien and unmistakably familiar in the way that all living things were familiar when you looked at them long enough. They were still, watching her. The entire chamber of them, she counted quickly and stopped at 30, which was enough, had oriented toward the entrance with the unified, unhurried attention of animals that had never needed to fear anything. Mara did not move. The closest one was 8 meters away. It was roughly the size of a draft horse if a draft horse had decided that the standard configuration of limbs was merely a suggestion. Its 4 eyes moved over her in sequence, a slow scanning motion, taking inventory. Then it reached her right arm. It stopped. All 4 eyes fixed on the prosthetic, on the divine femur beneath the iron bracing. The creature's head tilted, a gesture she recognized from dogs and occasionally from Dresch, and it made a sound, the first sound any of them had made. Low, resonant, felt more in the chest than heard with the ears. The others responded. The stillness shifted. Not threat, something more complex. She'd spent enough time around living things with intentions she had to interpret secondhand to recognize that this was not the prelude to an attack. She'd be dead already if it were. Okay, she said, to herself mostly. Okay. She set down the harpoon rig, slowly. No sudden movements, less because she thought they'd startle, and more because it seemed like the correct form of respect for a situation she didn't fully understand yet. She raised both hands, flesh and bone, palms out. The nearest creature lowered its head. It was not submission. It was something she didn't have a word for. Recognition, maybe. An acknowledgement of a category she occupied that she hadn't known she was in. Right, she said. Brilliant. The voice came while she was studying the tear crystal deposits along the east wall, calculating yield, doing the work because the work was something she knew how to do when everything else was operating outside her reference range. It did not come from the radio. It came from the place voices came from when they weren't coming from anything. The space just inside her own perception where she'd been hearing it since she was 12. Not auditory, not exactly. More like finding a sentence in your own thoughts that you hadn't written. She is not dead. Mara's hand stopped moving. She was very still for a moment. The clouded eye, the left one, the one that had gone gray at 12 after she touched a fragment of divine nerve cord on a dare and the contact had burned something in her vision permanently, was doing something. She could feel it without seeing it. The gray film that lived there, that doctors had given a dozen names for and understood poorly, was moving, shifting. She pressed 2 fingers to her temple, old reflex. Not now, she said quietly, to the voice or to herself. The distinction had always been philosophical. She turned, looked at the large shape coiled at the far end of the socket, the one she'd noticed on entering but had, through a conscious act of professional focus, deferred examining. It was larger than the others, significantly larger. Where the smaller creatures were draft horse-sized, this one occupied a space that would have swallowed a house. It lay coiled and still against the far wall, and in the amber light she could see that it was not the same species as the others, or was the same species in the way that a river was the same species as a drop of water. The origin was shared, but the scale had changed everything. One eye opened, pale gold, the size of a carriage wheel. It looked at her. Not at the room, not at the space, at her, with the specific, deliberate, cognitively weighted attention of something that understood the difference. "Hello," said Mara. The eye did not blink. "Protect them." She let out a long breath through her nose, looked at the ceiling, looked at the eggs hanging in their clusters, pulsing their slow, patient pulse, looked at the small creatures watching her with their diamond eyes. "What's in it for me?" she said. She said it to herself. She said it to the voice. She said it to the enormous creature across the chamber that had fixed her with an eye the size of furniture and was producing thoughts directly into her skull, apparently. These categories had stopped being meaningfully distinct. The creature moved, not toward her, sideways, a long, deliberate shift of its coiled bulk, and one massive limb extended toward the east wall, toward the tear crystal deposits, and it pointed. It pointed with intent, with the specific articular movement of a thing that had a concept of there and a concept of enough and was demonstrating the relationship between them. Mara stared at the deposit, at the creature, at the deposit again. The deposit was enormous, easily 200 kilos of grade A extract, 10 times her contract minimum. The pharmaceutical value alone, she did the calculation, which took approximately 4 seconds because it was the kind of calculation she'd been doing since she was 15, was significant, was more than significant, was the kind of number that didn't end careers, it ended the need for careers. "You're paying me," she said. The creature did not respond, because creatures did not respond to statements they'd already made their position clear on. "Right," said Mara. "Right, okay. Standard rate, plus hazard bonus for the..." She gestured vaguely at the body of the socket, at the eggs, at the nature of the entire situation. "Everything." She picked up the harpoon rig. "Don't get in my way. Don't bite me. If any of you bite me, I'll consider the contract void, and we'll revisit the whole arrangement." She looked at the nearest small creature. "Clear?" The creature regarded her with 4 eyes. She took this as a yes and went to meet the zealots. The weeping devout moved in single file along the cheekbone ridge, 20 of them, robed in white that had gone the color of old teeth, faces wrapped to the eyes, long ritual blades in hand. They had the practiced movement of people who did this regularly, and the specific energy of people who were righteously certain about it, which in Mara's experience was a more dangerous combination than being skilled or being numerous. Skills could be countered. Numbers could be reduced. Certainty was its own kind of armor. The priest led from the back, which was a choice Mara respected on a tactical level. He was middle-aged, unhurried, and had the face of a man who had decided decades ago that patience was a form of power and was still collecting the interest on that decision. She didn't give them the ridge. The cheekbone terrain was what it was, narrow in some sections, open in others, everywhere strange, the surface tilting and fissuring without the courtesy of geological predictability. She'd studied it on the approach, and she knew it better than they did, which was the only advantage she needed because she didn't require many. The first 2 went off the ridge before they knew she was there. She heard the impact of them hitting the water 60 feet below, 2 wet percussions with a small pause between, and had already moved before the 4 behind them had fully registered the loss. What followed was not, she would have said if asked, a fight. A fight implied a contest. This was closer to a series of problems she solved in the most efficient sequence available to her, using the terrain as a collaborator. The tithe, her cleaving tool, 90 centimeters of handle and 60 of single-edge blade, heavy enough to require genuine mass behind each swing and light enough in her hands to seem like an argument she was making rather than a physical object, was not her only instrument. She She used the harpoon rig to pin two through their robes to the surface of the divine skin, the iron spike passing cleanly through the fabric and sinking into the poor flesh beneath, which held, with the reliability of a material that had spent 2 centuries becoming something harder than stone. She used the ridge's geometry to turn charges into falls. She used the wide pores as cover and the wrinkle canyons as channels. She took a blade across her left side, a clean slice, not deep, but deep enough, the kind of wound that made itself known every time she breathed on the wrong side. She took another across her left shoulder, shallower, more noise than threat. The prosthetic arm took a direct impact from a 2-handed swing that cracked the iron bracing lengthwise, exposing a section of the divine femur beneath, which glowed faintly amber in the coastal light and made the zealot who done it take a step back in something that, in another context, might have been reverence. She hit him with the cracked arm. He sat down and then lay down and didn't revisit either. 17 down, 8 minutes. The priest and 2 guards remaining. The open ground on the upper cheek was wide enough for the encounter to feel theatrical, which she suspected the priest preferred. He had, she noticed, positioned himself so that the god's brow ridge formed a backdrop, the vast curve of divine skin behind him, enormous and pale in the gray coastal light. She'd known people who made themselves available to scenery, and he was one of them. "You work for the Rendered Corp," he said. "Freelance." His eyes moved to her arm, the exposed section of divine femur glowing faint gold through the crack in the iron. "That is divine femur, voluntarily fused, maintained at significant personal cost, I'd imagine." It was a medical decision. It was a theological one, he said, with the gentle certainty of someone who had simply decided they knew more than you and hadn't yet been sufficiently corrected for it. You don't believe that yet, but you made a choice, years ago, to take something divine into yourself. The arm was just the formalization of what was already true. She looked at him. She looked at the guards flanking him. She did a brief assessment and concluded that the guards were a formality, the kind of protective detail that existed to demonstrate status rather than provide it. She could remove them whenever she decided to care enough. "The god speaks to you," the priest said, not a question. Mara said nothing, which was its own kind of answer, and she knew it, and she resented it. "We have been watching for the marked one for 60 years, he said, "the one who enters the socket and returns, the one in whom the divine recognizes itself." He looked at the prosthetic, at the calcification creed moving up her forearm. "The arm is not dying, it's growing. You know this. I'm going to stop you there." The guards moved, and she was already low, the tithe sweeping at ankle height, the first one going down hard, and the second catching the bone fist across his jaw with a sound like a cabinet falling over. She straightened. Both guards were on the ground, breathing, which was more than she'd been required to offer them. The priest hadn't moved. "I'm not your prophecy," she said. "No." He folded his hands. "You're something rarer, a prophecy that doesn't know it's a prophecy yet." A pause. "You went into the eye." "Yes, and came out. Clearly." The last 6 people who entered that socket, their bodies were found open from the sternum outward. He said it without particular inflection, as if reporting weather. Clean wounds, as though something had used their chest cavity as an egress point. She thought of the Rendered Corp contractor, the flower petal sternum. "I found one of them," she said, "on the cheek." 7 then, the priest said. "The brood does not admit strangers. It has not admitted strangers in 200 years of nesting, until you." The silence between them was the size of a god's face. "The calcification," he said. "It won't stop at the elbow. You know this too." She did know this. She'd known it for a while with the specific knowledge that you carried quietly, because making it loud didn't change it, and at least being quiet about it let her sleep on the occasional good night. "I'm leaving," she said. "Your people will need collecting. Some of them are in the water. I'd move quickly on those." He raised his hands, open palms. She recognized the grammar of the gesture, surrender, or its equivalent in someone who did not intend to be defeated. Word will spread, he said, of the marked one, of the eye. Every faction will come, the rendered corp, the preservationists, the cults you haven't met yet, the ones that make us look measured. I'll manage it. I'm certain you will. Something crossed his face, not quite a smile, not quite pity, some third thing she didn't have the word for. But you should know what you're managing. The drowned one is not dead. The brood inside that socket has been gestating for 2 centuries, and whatever is growing in your arm is not divine contact damage. He lowered his hands. It is a conversation. He walked away. His guards dragged themselves upright and followed, and the 3 of them moved down the cheekbone ridge with the unhurried dignity of people who had made their point and were content to let it compound with time. Mara watched them go. The wind off the weeping coast moved across the divine skin. The god's brow ridge above her was vast and still and smelled like the end of something very large. A conversation, she said to nobody. Her arm pulsed, once faint, amber warm. She went back inside. She took what she was owed, not what she could take, not what the deposit would yield if she spent a full working day at it, which was more than she'd earn in a year of contracts and more than she could realistically transport on Dresch's barge regardless. She took 40 kilos of grade A crystal, chipped precisely from the eastern wall with the care of someone who understood that excess was unprofessional and that what you didn't take was as much a part of the work as what you did. The mother watched her from across the chamber. That was how she'd started thinking of the large creature. The mother. It wasn't accurate, probably. Divine biology didn't map cleanly onto mammalian frameworks. But the creature occupied the space in the ecology of the eye socket the way a mother occupied a space, and Mara's brain had needed something to call it. So, the small creatures had dispersed around her while she worked, some maintaining their distance, a few drifting close enough to observe. The one that had lowered its head when she arrived had stationed itself approximately 3 meters away and tracked her movements with the patient attention of something that had decided to be interested in her specifically. She found it, by the end, less unnerving than she'd expected. This was probably not a healthy development. I'll be back, she told the mother as she sealed the canister. Not for the crystal. I have enough. She paused, considered whether she was actually going to say the next part. Decided she was, because she'd already spent 22 years pretending she didn't hear the voice, and it hadn't gotten her anywhere. If they come for the brood, the corp, the cults, whoever, you'll need someone who can move above ground without people trying to kill her as a matter of policy. The mother's eye was open, watching. I'll come back, Mara said. Standard rate. The eye did not blink, which she was taking as a yes. The barge moved away from the drowned one through water that was black and perfectly still. Dresch had cleaned and bandaged her wounds with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd had considerable practice at this specific skill set and had long since stopped asking questions about the specific wounds. He'd asked one question when she'd come back over the ridge with the canister and the harpoon rig, and 17 fewer devout between her and the dock. The other 3? They left. The priest? He made a speech and left. What did he say? He said, I'm a prophecy that doesn't know it's a prophecy yet. Dresch had absorbed this. Then, what do you think? I think prophecies don't have mortgages. He'd gone back to navigating. Now she sat at the bow, the canister between her feet, watching the drowned one recede. From the water, the eye socket was already just a dark gap in the god's brow, anonymous, geological, giving nothing away. The amber glow from inside was invisible at this distance. The brood was invisible. The mother was invisible. From out here, it was just a dead god's face. She flexed the prosthetic, felt the crack in the iron bracing, the exposed section of divine bone warm even through the damaged casing, the calcification line, the warmth, a conversation. She thought about the rendered corp body on the cheek, about the file some executive somewhere had on her. She'd known for years she was being tracked. She'd chosen not to think about it too hard, which had always been the plan and which she was now retrospectively revising as a plan. About the priest retreating back and his satisfied expression. About the 6 cults she knew by name and the ones she didn't. about the voice, which had been quiet since the socket, which was new. The voice was never quiet. She thought about the words it had given her. She is not dead. Present tense. Specific. A God that had taken 2 centuries to gestate whatever it was gestating in its own eye socket, patient as geology, and had now been found. Dresh, she said. Yeah. What do you know about the preservationists? A pause. Academic types. They think the gods can be brought back. They archive everything, don't publish anything, hate the court more than anyone does. Where are they based? Nobody knows. That's the whole thing with them. They're ghosts. Why? She pulled her sleeve down over the prosthetic arm, over the warm, cracked, glowing section of something that was no longer simply a medical device. I want to know what I am before somebody else decides to tell me, she said. Dresh navigated for a moment. I'll ask around, he said. The drowned one disappeared into the coastal haze behind them. The water was flat and dark and vast. Somewhere in the deep distance, across 3 days of hard sailing, the Marrow cities rose from the remains of a different god's skeleton, the world's most advanced civilization, built on bones. She had a contract to deliver. She had wounds to let heal. She had an arm that was conducting a conversation she hadn't consented to, and a voice in her head that had, for the first time in 22 years, said something that turned out to be true. She dealt with worse. She thought about it. She dealt with worse, but not often. End of episode 1.